Hi, my name is Brian Baldauff, and I'm the Director of Percussion Studies here at the University of Wisconsin Stevens Point. I'm going to be performing the WSMA Honors Audition piece for snare drum, and then offering some tips for you at the end of the video. So I'm going to first perform the piece. You can hopefully use this as a reference while you're learning or maybe polishing up the etude for the audition. And at the end, I'll offer you some tips to keep polishing and learning the etude if you're in that initial stage. Also, we have some additional learning opportunities. If you'd like to connect with me, there'll be information on how to do that at the end of the video. So, hope you enjoy. Okay, so here's some practice and performance tips for the snare drum etude. If you've started working through this already, you probably realize that it's in 5/8 meter, which can already pose a bit of a challenge in terms of counting as well as playing with a metronome. So there's lots of opportunities for us to dig into some tips there to work with that. I would say one of the biggest challenges in this piece, one are the rolls, right, that come up really quickly and move by very rapidly, as well as the dynamic changes that happen, and just keeping the rhythm all in time in that meter. Because it does move by pretty quick, the piece itself, especially when we get down to, where is it, measure 25, and we have some of those 32nd note figures, we get to some of the sextuplet figures later, so it does move by pretty quickly. So speed is a challenge in this etude, the rolls and dynamics. So let's deal with some different things related to feeling the meter itself, playing some of the rhythmic material, and give you some ways to practice that. So when I'm practicing snare drum, I do like to, well, one, I like to wear earplugs if I'm indoors, in a small practice room or something, working one snare drum. It's definitely pretty loud. But I also like to turn the snares off. Practice pad work is also really terrific. So, if you don't have access to a drum all the time, practicing on a pad really, you can work through the rhythms, you can work through dynamics, you can work with a metronome, right, and do a lot of good work on a practice pad. But in the end, playing it on a drum definitely feels different, so I try to spend as much time on the drum as I can. So with that said too, I like to play with the snares off because, well, for two reasons. One, it's less abrasive on the ears, right, than with the snares on. And two, which is really the main reason, is that it allows me to really hear differences between my right and left hands. I think it's even more exposed if I have the snares off. So I do a lot of practicing, whether it's stick control or other types of exercises or rhythmic stuff, etudes with the snares off, because it really helps me to listen. So that's, I guess, tip number one, is to practice with your snares off and wear earplugs when you can. So if we take a look at a couple of things in this etude, if we start at the beginning, Vic Firth even notes in his instructions here that he says that he's clearly marked, right, groups of, in 5/8, we can have groups of 2 plus 3 or groups of 3 plus 2. And you can see here how he's done that at the very beginning. There's 2 8 notes and 3 8 notes and 2 8 notes and then 3 8 notes. And so emphasizing that is kind of nice. Now there's no accents written, so instead of really playing it as, I'm not going to try to accent those flams. I want to make sure that the 8 notes are even, but I still might want to hear that da 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 1 2 1 2 3 1 2 1 2 3. I still might want to hear that kind of present in my playing. So I always like to play this with a metronome. So I have 8th notes going here with no accent, so I can play at the 1/16 tempo. Here we go. So here's the first 2 bars. If I play it straight, here it's very da-da-da-da, very even, which sounds fine, and it's what the music says, but what if we emphasize the groupings just a bit? So you can kind of hear ja-da-ja-da-da-ja-da-ja-da-da, kind of leads to the 3. So it kind of gives me a little bit of a bump on that 3, and I think that gives it a little bit more, I don't know, it's more musical, even though I'm not punching the accent really hard, so I can get away with that. So just something to consider. Do you want to emphasize those groups of 2 and 3 that flow throughout this entire etude? So that's something to think about as we kind of work into the polishing stages, especially getting ready for performance. So then if we're really in the learning stage and we have a lot to consider and a lot to think about here, stickings become an issue, right? So this relates a little bit to the tempo that we're going to take it, because certain stickings work better slow than they do fast, as you've probably figured out. So the tempo, so we want to stay nice and slow and really process all of the stickings that we've chosen. I want to write those stickings into my music so that I don't forget. And then practicing those dynamic changes, because that always becomes an issue. I think if students get called out on one thing more than anything else, it's dynamics, right? In auditions, in performances, in those types of sort of juried or graded or evaluated performances. So I'm going to slow this way down, actually. And I'm going to start it at 70 instead of 116. So this could be a good practice tempo. This might be, a little slow, obviously. I'm using 16th roll basses for all the rolls, so this is going to sound a little choppy. But I want to look at measure 13, and I'm going to start measure 13 and do that subito piano change right there on measure 15. And I'm going to play 2 measures at 13, and then play the figure at measure 15. So here we go. So why wouldn't I change to a different roll bass? Because that does sound very choppy. Well, because I want to keep practicing with the same sticking that I'm going to use, the same exact rhythmic bass that I'm going to use when I take it faster, so that I'm training my hands to do so, even though it does sound very choppy. What I'm really focused on here is not so much the roll bass, but that transition between the loud forte moment that I have at 13, and then that piano subito where I'm going to move out to the edge. So for dynamics, I can exploit parts of the drum and say I might play in the center or toward the center for louder playing, and I'm going to play in the edge for softer playing, which means I have to practice that transition, right? So if you can see my sticks move here, I'm going to do it one more time, and I'm going to practice moving toward the piano so that I can play it out here toward the edge. So you can see that I'm moving there right after that last 8th note that I play on measure 14. So I'm going to really practice that back and forth several times until it feels comfortable and feels natural to move out there and play soft. And that's going to help with that dynamic difference, that dynamic transition. When we look at the crescendo that comes up at measure 23, I'm going to practice moving back toward the center so that I can get to that fortissimo at measure 25, and I can be in the center for that moment. So speaking of measure 23, this is a good time to talk about the rhythmic part of this. One of the exercises I might play, I love to make exercises out of the music that I'm playing because I think that helps me learn it more accurately. So again, if I have this metronome on, I'm still at 70, so it is still slow. I'm thinking about triplets to 16th notes. This is a rhythm that gets distorted often, and this is one of those spots to really zone in on and practice so that you can play very accurately. So I'm just going to play it even for now, just to get the feel of da 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 da, just that back and forth. Okay, and then I'll accent where the 16th note goes. Careful that I don't play and rush that triplet, which is usually the tendency to do with this kind of a rhythm. So I'm going to practice exercises just dealing with that without the accent, with the accent, with various dynamics, crescendos. I might even decrescendo it just to really gain control and then gradually start speeding that up. So rhythmically speaking, that triplet to 16th note happens pretty often, or triplets to 8th notes if we're in 8th note triplets. So you can see in measure 37, there's 8th note triplets to 8th notes, and then sextuplets to 16th notes. So that really 3 to 4, that 3 to 2, that idea back and forth of triple to duple in this, we really need to practice that rhythmically before we put it into context in the piece. So eventually I would gradually speed this up, back to the performance tempo, practicing snares off, sometimes snares back on, sometimes snares off, always recording myself during my practice so that I can go back and listen to what I sound like. So again, I hope that these practice tips were useful for you. If you want to connect with me with some other learning experiences, feel free to reach out. Some of the things that we offer are some lessons, whether that's in person, if you can get to Stevens Point, or virtually, if you'd like to play some of this for me through a Zoom lesson, I'd be happy to listen to that and give you feedback. We also have a clinic coming up that we're offering across the department for all instruments on this specific music. It's supposed to be on November the 6th from 10 to noon, so 10 a.m. to noon. All right, so I hope these practice tips were useful, and happy practicing.